What's going on today, everybody? Welcome back to another awesome Fix It Garage video. Today, I feel like we're actually gonna live up to our name and we're going to fix something. And instead of, building awesome cars like this, we're gonna put in some maintenance and fix this. This is a buddy of mine's '09 Ford Explorer, and it's got a pretty significant problem that's very common on these cars, and I'm gonna show you guys today how to fix it. But before we get started on fixing this Ford Explorer, I want to go ahead and thank all of you guys who subscribe and watch my videos. If you guys are new here, don't forget to click that subscribe button if fixing stuff like this or building cars like this are things that you are interested in. Now let's take a look at what is going on with this Explorer. Alrighty, so we have our Ford Explorer sitting right here, and we have a major coolant leak from the thermostat housing. You can see kind of where it's leaking there, and it's lots of coolant inside there. That is not good. Luckily, the fix is pretty simple. It's just replacing this thermostat housing assembly here. Here is our new part sitting here on the bench. We've got a new thermostat inside and the complete housing, so we can replace it, and hopefully he won't have any more coolant leaks. We're also, because of the mileage of the vehicle, we're gonna be throwing in a set of spark plugs, so I will show you guys how to do that as well. First thing that we need to do in order to replace that part is we need to drain the cooling system while trying to make as small of a mess as possible. Most of the time that is easier said than done. First thing I like to do when I do something like this is drain the radiator, and then I'll pop off the lower coolant hose and drain the coolant. So let's get started draining the cooling system. You're gonna need a nice drain bucket, and I recommend a drip tray so you don't cover your shop floor in coolant. So let's get started. So now we have our coolant draining from right here. We're gonna go ahead and let that drain. While that's draining, we're going to change out the spark plugs. Changing out the spark plugs on this is pretty straightforward. The plugs are down here by the manifold, so we'd have to pull these boots off, pull the plugs out, put the new plugs in, and that should be good to go. So let's go ahead and we'll work on the driver's side first, then we'll move over and work on the passenger side spark plugs. Alrighty, so that is one side of the engine done. We got the driver's side all done. So let me show you kind of what's going on down in there, and we can move on to the passenger side. So down in here, we've got our 3 spark plugs there, and over in here in this tight little space. We went ahead and we got them changed out. Let's take a look at the old spark plugs and kind of compare them to the new ones. Over here at the workbench, we can notice a couple differences. This plug is an iridium plug, and this one is not. You can tell by looking at the tips, this has a very fine point tip compared to this more flat tip. These ones you can change the gaps on. These ones, it's recommended that you don't. You use the gaps that are already in them, but it's always good to double check and make sure that all your plugs come evenly gapped when you buy a new set of spark plugs. The other difference, you can kind of see that this one's a little broken. So when installing the first plug, my socket got a little bit cockeyed and it cracked the ceramic, but we have an extra one to install, so we will take care of that. Luckily for us, we came prepared. Other differences, this one, you can see it's got quite a bit of corrosion on the end where the boot plugs into the electrode. These are definitely worn. These gaps have gotten pretty large. Newer of these plugs have a little bit tighter of a gap. So it's definitely probably time that we replace these spark plugs. So now we got that side done, we're gonna move on to the driver's side. Meanwhile, the coolant over here has been just draining away. So we're gonna keep letting that drain while we change out the other spark plug. And just like that, the passenger side spark plugs are done. In some ways, the passenger side's a little bit easier, but also a little bit harder. Let me show you why. So obviously we had to take off the intake tube, which gives you a little bit more room to get in here and change them. With the intake tube on, you can go through this gap right here and change them, but because I'm filming this for YouTube, I needed a place to put that. So this was the easiest way to take it out so I could get in here and change them. Now there's a lot more room on this side. This one, for some reason, my ratchet kept liking to hit different things over here, so that made it a little bit challenging to get to this. It made it a little bit more challenging to get to this first spark plug. On the other side, our big issue is this first plug right here. You can see all the stuff that's in the way, so there's not a whole lot of room, and these hoses, yeah, they're not flexible. This is the AC line, so that's a hard metal line, so it's not really flexible, making it harder to get into this one. And then the other two, you have the steering shaft kind of here, which gets in the way, so that made it a little bit of a challenge. But we got all of them changed, and perfect timing, because the coolant is now drained and we're ready to start. We gotta remove the lower radiator hose, and then we can start changing out our thermostat housing. All right, so I was going to film doing the lower hose, but I took it off and nothing came out, so it was super uneventful. Pretty straightforward. You undo the hose clamp, pull the hose off, put the hose on, put the hose clamp back on, and you're done. Except for we had one problem. Here's that hose clamp. It broke. It was so old and brittle that it actually was rusty, and it cracked and broke right here on the backside from where you push the clamp to release it. So this is no good anymore. However, because I keep things in my shop, you look down here, you can kind of see there's a shiny metal hose clamp on there. I like to keep extras of some certain kinds of consumables around here, like hose clamps and stuff like that, because you just never know on these older cars if something's gonna break. So if you're gonna do a job like this, highly recommend you make sure you have like some hose clamps laying around, or if you live close to an auto parts store, you can at least go pick up some of those worm gear hose clamps. They will save you in a pinch if you're trying to finish a car the same day and something breaks. That way you're not left with your car stranded in the garage or in your driveway. You can get it fixed and get it back on the road, kind of like what we're doing. So now that that part's done, we're gonna move on to the actual thermostat housing. The thermostat housing has a sensor, 1, 2, and down there, 3 hoses and 3 bolts. So all we're gonna need to do is unplug the sensor, unbolt it, remove these hoses, and we can take this thermostat housing off and install our new thermostat housing. So let's go ahead and let's start taking everything apart so we can get the thermostat housing out of there. All right, so we now have the thermostat out of the car. Let's take a quick look inside this engine bay. So looking inside the engine bay, you can see right here where those bolts bolt up for the thermostat housing, and that goes directly into the engine block. You have the hose down here that heads down towards the water pump, and then the upper radiator hose, we've moved it out of the way, and you have this upper hose right here. So you can see all of this coolant in here was coming from that thermostat housing. It was leaking pretty good. We're gonna clean it up a little bit before we install the new part on there, but let's take a look at the old one and I can kind of show you what's wrong with it. Moving over here to the bench, here is our old thermostat housing, and you can kind of see there's coolant here, there's coolant all in here, and here's why. Look at how brittle that is. This plastic is extremely brittle from old age, which allows this thing to crack and leak from all over the place. So this has a lot of little cracks in it that are now leaking. By installing our brand new one, this car should no longer leak for quite a long time. It is still a plastic part, which I am not the biggest fan of. At the same time, they don't make a metal upgrade for this. It is a plastic part, so we have to kind of use what we got here. This is a newer plastic part using newer materials, so this will probably hold up a little bit longer than this one did before it ever starts leaking again. All we still need to do is we need to transfer the sensor from the old one to the new one, and we can install this back in the car. The sensor on these is held in with a plastic or with a metal retaining clip, so we'll pop the retaining clip and the sensor out and we'll put it into our new one, and then we can throw this thing in the car. All right, so I'm gonna attempt to hold the camera and show you guys how to do this. Stick your screwdriver here. You're gonna pop that clip out. like so. Here's what the clip looks like. Nice little metal clip. And now the sensor should just, well, that didn't quite work. We'll try that again. All right, so we're going to just kind of use this tool, kind of gently pry up on it. There we go, now it's coming out. There we go, one coolant temp sensor. We're gonna put a little bit of Seal Glide on this O-ring, and then we're gonna install it in the new part. And just like that, we've got it installed and clipped in. Let's go ahead and throw this thing back into the car. Alright, so now we have the thermostat housing fully installed. We've actually filled it with coolant, as you saw, and we had to change out the sensor. So what we found was the sensor O-ring on this was so worn out, it was leaking. Could not get an O-ring for this thing. I called around, nobody had the O-ring in stock. They had the sensor, so we went ahead and we put a new sensor in it. Plus, looking at this, it's not gonna hurt it to have a brand new sensor. So let's take a look at this thermostat housing. So looking in here, look at that, nice brand new thermostat housing. All of our hoses are reconnected, hose clamps on, and our new temp sensor is installed with its brand new O-ring. Now we can go ahead and we can start bleeding the cooling system. Whenever you fill a cooling system back up, there's gonna be air in it. Well, we need to bleed it all out. Make sure you look at your service information for the correct way to bleed the cooling system. I know I will be checking that before I start bleeding it. So now let's get into bleeding our cooling system. All right, so to bleed the cooling system, you need to make sure you have the coolant filled up to that coolant cold fill line or just above it, and have the radiator cap on. Run the car, warm it up, rev it up, and you gotta rev it up to about 3 grand a couple times, and I let it back down to idle. I have a scanner in the car, so I am monitoring coolant temps while I'm doing this. When I see about 190, I shut the car off, let it sit for about 5 minutes, and fire it back up. Make sure that it builds up coolant pressure, and if it does, I know the system has bled. If it is building up pressure, and if I see the reservoir no longer going down, meaning it's not pulling more coolant in and replacing the air with coolant, so I know at that point my system is bled. For that, I let it run for a while, make sure it comes up to operating temperature without overheating, comes back down, make sure the thermostat opens, all of those different things. Once I verify all of that, I know that the system is bled and everything is done. Alrighty guys, so the cooling system's all done. We've got the reservoir filled up correctly. The thermostat housing is no longer leaking, and the cooling system builds pressure as it should. So this thing is now good to go. This is a very common issue on these cars, so hopefully you guys got a little insight on what is going on and how to fix it. That is gonna do it for today. If you like what you saw, don't forget to smash the like button, leave me some comments and positive thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe if you guys like to see some common repairs and awesome car builds, and of course some really fun track days. But that is gonna do it for today. Thank you guys all for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.